What's up guys, Vulkan here. Today we are talking about Last Epoch, and I've had lots of folks asking about this game recently, so I thought I would put together a nice little overview to help paint a picture of what this game is. Lots of people asking about in Discord, comments, things like that. So Last Epoch, as a foundation, is a hardcore action RPG from 11th Hour Games that takes players across multiple timelines, offers tons of loot, and has a unique skill specialization system that kind of sets it apart from other action RPGs. Plus, it's going to be buy to play at launch for $15. Now, quick side note, before we get into the videos for this game, the graphics for the game will be improved closer to launch. I don't think they're overly terrible now, but the developers are spending time to create solid systems first, then focus on visuals later. So don't go into this expecting AAA graphics or anything like that. Those will come at a later point in time. So let's start this thing off with classes. The game currently features 4 classes: the Acolyte, Sentinel, Mage, and Primalist, with another class coming soon called the Rogue, and each class has 3 specializations, and these come in the form of talent trees. These allow you to build the character the way you want. And all these talent trees are pretty different. So if we take the Primalist, for example, you have a Druid, which can shapeshift into a Werebear, into a Spriggan, things like that. You have the Shaman, which is all built around totems. And you have the Beastmaster, which is built around having a herd of animals, all of which are different styles of play. So some people are probably asking, well, Vulkan, why haven't we heard of this game if it's so good, if you're praising it so much? Well, it's because the game is still in beta. The game itself is coming along incredibly well. They already have about 15 hours of story gameplay, depending on your speed, and that's before you even hit endgame. Now, most people haven't heard of the game yet because the developers haven't had any sort of marketing campaigns, or they haven't had any need to push the game onto players because they're still making big improvements and they're allowing word of mouth to really kind of spread the knowledge of the game. I heard about it through another YouTuber. So it's one of those things where you can't just search hardcore action RPGs and Last Epoch comes to the top of the list. It's almost all word of mouth or posts about top 10 games you don't know about, things like that. So the question is, what separates this game from others? Why should I shell out the $35 cash for it if I want to play it right now? Well, the answer to this is always subjective, right? It's very different for each person. People like different things, but the main reason why I personally dove in and backed the game was due to its skill system. Last Epoch has a unique approach to character builds where all of the skills in the game have their own skill tree. And this skill tree changes how the skill works fundamentally. So this could be something simple like taking the summon skeleton skill and forcing it to only summon skeleton mages or archers or death knights, things like that. On the other hand, you can have a skill tree like Fire Shield, where it's a defensive skill on its own that grants extra shield and occasionally retaliates with a fireball if hit, so it's more of a reactory type of build. Well, using the skill tree that comes with Fire Shield, you're able to take this defensive skill and make it offensive, make it proactive by giving it a huge fire aura, which deals massive damage over time. It causes ignites. You can force fireballs to retaliate much more frequently, apply burns, they can pierce. You can create basically a big shielded fire aura build, and it's fantastic. I've used this on my mage for quite some time, and it's just fun because you can pop this thing, it's an aura, you run through stuff, catches it on fire, you can clean it up with a couple of other abilities. If you need a hard-hitting boss ability, you pop this aura as well, but you use a meteor style ability to create some sort of single target damage. So it's just fun to go in and kind of piece this stuff together, and the skill trees allow you to do that. Then if we take that unique skill tree and combine it with the strong gear system in Last Epoch, it gives players even more control and the ability to fine-tune your character with unique gear and items. So gearing in this game, right, in Last Epoch is pretty similar to other games in terms of like rarity, chasing the best in slot items. So it's not anything different in that regard, right? You're always chasing that well-rolled piece of gear that's going to help your build. Now, gear does come in 5 flavors: common, magic, rare, unique, and set. So before everybody jumps to conclusions, I know when people hear set, they're like, oh God, and they, have that flashbacks. Sets in Last Epoch are not as mandatory as in other games, like Diablo Diablo, for instance. They do provide strong bonuses, but you give up the ability to craft or refine that gear, right? You have to take it as is, which could leave you with a weakness in your survivability, and it often does. It gives you something pretty powerful, but at the same time, you're going to miss out on some key stats that you'll either have to make up elsewhere or just deal with the kind of weakness being there. Now, I did mention idols, right? If you're familiar with charms from Diablo 2, this is a similar system. These idols are frequently dropped as you're progressing through the story. They have their own place in your inventory, and your inventory kind of idol slot is a 4x4 grid. And it starts off with just 4 little tiny boxes that are opened. And as you progress through the story, doing side quests, main quests, this box opens up. Before long, you'll have your full kind of idol inventory and can fit quite a few in there or a couple. It really kind of depends on the size of the idol. The larger the idol, the more benefit it provides you. Now, these are pretty slick, right? Because they do provide targeted bonuses that can be used to really kind of give your character a boost or make some builds much more easily achievable. So for instance, the Acolyte has a spell called Aura of Decay. This deals massive amounts of poison damage to everything around her, but also deals poison damage to herself. So naturally, most people would start stacking poison resistance and HP regen if they want to use this build, right? Because you need to survive the self-damage. But with idols, you're able to find some that are built specifically for that skill that give massive amounts of poison resistance and reducing damage over time bonuses when you activate the aura. So which gives you some flexibility and allows you to not just simply target poison resistance, things like that, and it allows you to kind of explore other stats. So moving into crafting, we talked about gear, we talked about skills, so crafting. Last Epoch offers a hybrid crafting system. It performs more like a refinement system for gear, but what game doesn't these days? So cutting to the chase, you cannot craft uniques or set pieces. These are locked, but everything else is fair game. Now, the crafting system can get very deep very quickly, so I'm going to glaze over it in this section, but just know there will most likely be a video specifically on crafting. Now, if you want a deep dive now, I highly recommend Thyworm's crafting videos. He's a good friend of mine, has some great content out there. Those are in the description below. It's a 3-part series, so I highly encourage you to go check that out if you want that deep dive today. Now, crafting in Last Epoch is all about trying to get as high of tier affixes as you can, because gear can drop with affixes between tier 1 and tier 5. And just to level the playing field, an affix is something like +5 strength or +15 crit chance. Those are affixes, attributes, stats, however you want to refer to them. In Last Epoch, they're referred to as affixes. So obviously, the higher of tier, the better the rolls. And the better the rolls, the more impact those stats will have on your game. The game also allows you to harvest affixes from gear using shattering stones, which will destroy the item, but it'll also pull affixes from it and add those to your crafting materials, which can then be used for later. So if you get a pair of gloves that are gross and you don't need them, but they have a really good stat on them, you know, let's say like +5 int or something like that, then you can actually take this rune of shattering and you can break down the item and hopefully gain that intelligence shard, which then you can use at a later point in time on a different piece of gear. So that's kind of how those work. It's pretty great. I like the system. But the overall catch here is that each time you add an affix to an item or you improve the tier of affix, your item gains instability. And before long, your item becomes unstable and could fracture. Now, fractured pieces of gear can no longer be improved, but they can still be used. So whenever they fracture, that is a snapshot. That's it. That's what you get. Use it. That's all. Damaged pieces of gear are either non-usable or usable but lost some stats. It's non-usable if it gets a major damage. If it gets a minor damage, then it loses some stats, but you can still use it. So not highly recommended. Basically, damaged pieces of gear I wouldn't worry too much about, but that's something to keep in mind. Now, this does create a large risk-reward factor when improving gear, right? It helps drive the economy towards finding gear with high base stats, so you don't have to roll the dice on fracturing gear. If you get something that has high tier of affixes, a high base damage, all of that type of stuff, then you don't have to worry as much of, I'm going to keep throwing these affixes onto it, I'm going to keep upping the tier, and it becomes more and more and more unstable, therefore it's going to fracture, and that's kind of how the gearing works. So that's what we'll talk about in that specific crafting video, but that's an overview of how kind of the system works. Now let's move into longevity. Longevity for the game, and that means end game. So what does Last Epoch bring to the table in terms of in-game systems? Well, there are currently two that are available in the beta, the Monolith of Fate and the Arena. The Arena is a wave-based mode. It's accessed after finding some arena keys as a reward for Monolith of Fate runs, and it gives you some strong loot the further you get in waves. It's fun to play. I really like it, and it also allows you to test builds out pretty easily. The Monolith of Fate is like a chained rift system, is the best way for me to describe it. You begin by choosing between two modifiers. This opens up a randomized map with that modifier and allows you to clear it. If you finish the objective, whether it's kill the boss, whether it's destroy some spires, whether it's cleanse a forge, then you're rewarded with a chest, and you can continue the chain by choosing another modifier and another map. And this continues for eternity, right? Until you die. This is it. This is your thing. But every few modifiers, you're going to run into one that will last for multiple rifts. So for instance, you may see a modifier that says, for the next 2 timelines, enemies will have plus 25% chance to stun on hit. So this modifier would then overlap to your next timeline, essentially doubling the modifiers on the next map. And these can get pretty intense because at a certain point you can have 3+, 4+, 5+ mods on maps to really ratchet up the difficulty and create a hard time for you. But with all of the mods that are added to the maps, you also gain item rarity, so magic find. So you're going to be going through these, and yes, they will be more difficult, but you have a higher chance of finding uniques, set pieces, those items you really need. So lastly are the other in-game systems that aren't in the game yet, but they're coming soon. You have the Gates of Moriam. This is a mode that allows you to rerun the story, but it's scaled to your level and adds new added challenges to create some variety. You have Epoch's Call. These are like boss bounties. So you're given targets to hunt, eliminate for rewards. Coliseum, this is straight up PvP. You can battle in duels, 2v2, 3v3, 5v5, and free-for-all modes. These give you cosmetic rewards. You can kind of show off like, what's up, I'm the king of duels. That is possible coming soon. And then Lost Memories. Now, Lost Memories are pretty unique. I really like this system. It gives a little more immersion and depth to the game. So Lost Memories are items that drop that will lead players on quest lines to give them unique rewards, like skills or gear. So for instance, this is the example given by the developers because this isn't currently in game yet. You're out killing these things and a spear drops, a sun spear. And this sends you on a quest line to actually hunt down wyverns for a special item. You get that special item, a wyvern tail, which then sends you to find an old woman selling a venom-stained shroud that you trade for using the wyvern tail. This shroud will actually complete the memory and grants you a unique skill called Wyvern Strike after the legionnaire who used to hunt wyverns using the spear you found. So it's this big chain of events that ends up leading to something that's gameplay impacting, which is pretty cool. Now, I'm curious to see how this is going to be balanced in terms of, are these skills going to be required? Therefore, RNG is going to influence whether or not your build is going to be possible. And the reason I say that is I'm thinking back to like World of Warcraft and Vanilla, where you had tomes, and these tomes would drop for paladins, for priests, and you had to find these different books in order to gain these skills. And if you didn't have these skills, then people would not invite you to parties. And in a multiplayer game like this, I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but I'm thinking for build potential, it might be one of those things where I need to go farm these particular enemies to get this spear that drops in order to get Wyvern Strike, in order to create a Wyvern Strike build, which is meta right now. So I'm curious how that's all going to work. I think it's going to work out well. I have a lot of faith in the devs, but this is a really cool system, and it creates a little bit more incentive to get out in the world and farm specific areas instead of just sitting in a hub and smashing endgame until the lights go out. So that's really kind of a quick and dirty hit on what is Last Epoch. There is a lot more to the game than this, but these are the big ticket items that I think really can kind of give you a gist of whether or not this game is for you. So what comes next for the game, right? Well, they do have a roadmap kind of detailing what they're working on, what each phase these items should come in. I've linked that below so you can view it for yourself. But ultimately, the next thing that we're going to see is a patch called 0.7.7. It's going to bring new visuals to the game to improve the graphics. They're adding in shrines, they're adding in ambient music, they're adding in new skills, new skill trees, and a lot more, to be honest. They also hired a new animation guy to kind of shore up the animations for the characters, which I know has been a point of contention for some people. So that is coming for the future. So what do you guys think about Last Epoch? Have you heard of it before? Have you never heard of it? Does it look interesting? Is it something you're going to skip? I know a lot of people are going to ask this question. Vulkan, what do you think between Last Epoch and between Wilson? What do you think between Last Epoch and Path of Exile? So I'll give you guys a high overview of what I think between these two. Last Epoch and Wilson. Last Epoch wins on the build variety. I think Last Epoch has a lot more variety in terms of build possibilities. I think it's in a much more stable state than Wilson is currently. Wilson does win out, I think, on combat fluidity as well as visuals. Wilson just feels smoother to play right now. I do think the animations for Last Epoch are going to be improved, which will then help with some of that fluid combat. Going into Path of Exile versus Last Epoch, I think in terms of content, I mean, Path of Exile obviously has the one up in that regard. They've been around for longer. They've been able to kind of create their vision a little bit longer. So I would say if you're looking at a pure what can I do basis, then Path of Exile might win out, depending on who you are. But ultimately, I think when it comes down to it, Path of Exile really focuses heavy on one skill builds and aura builds. Last Epoch is going to be a little bit more complex in terms of using multiple skills to be as efficient as possible. So I think between those two, that's kind of going to be a gameplay style decision. Really, you can't go wrong with either game. But that really kind of wraps up this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you guys online in Last Epoch. If you're in game, just shout Vulkan. I'm usually around, and I'll try to pop in and answer all the questions as possible. So anyway, guys, thank you for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.